America watched as the king of conspiracy finally met his match. It was supposed to be just another Alex Jones tirade, the kind of broadcast where his voice thundered like a storm, pounding fists on the desk to hammer down his version of truth. The lights of the studio glared, the cameras rolled, and Jones leaned forward, face flushed red, eyes wild with fire. He shouted into the mic, spittle flying, his voice cracking under the weight of his own rage. The walls seemed to shake with every unhinged declaration. And then there she was, Jasmine Crockett, calm, unmoved. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She sat across from him with a presence that could only be described as electric stillness. Where Jones's chaos filled the air like a suffocating fog, Crockett cut through with silence, measured glances, and the kind of patience that feels more powerful than shouting ever could. The tension was unbearable. Every viewer knew something was about to happen, but no one could quite predict what. Jones barked out accusations as if volume could make them true. He slammed his palm against the desk, so hard the microphone rattled. "You're nothing but a puppet of the establishment," he yelled, his voice climbing into a rasp. "You think you can come on MY show and lecture me?" His words were meant to intimidate, to rattle, to dominate. But Crockett simply folded her hands, eyes locked on him, expression steady. And in that stillness, she commanded more authority than all his noise combined. For a moment, Jones seemed to realize it too. His chest heaved as he waited for her to break, for her to meet fire with fire. Instead, she breathed in slowly, and the corners of her lips curled, not in a smile, but in something sharper, something that said, "I've been here before. I know how to deal with men like you." The audience leaned in. Social media chat rooms lit up as the clip went live. People typed furiously, "She's not scared. Look at her. She's about to end him." Millions held their breath. But no one expected what Crockett would reveal next, the truth that silenced him. Oh, understand the weight of this confrontation. You have to understand who Alex Jones is, and what he represents. For decades, he's been the voice of America's darkest corners, a man who thrives on anger and sells paranoia like it's gospel. His empire, InfoWars, built itself on the backs of conspiracy theories. Chemicals in the water turning people into monsters, government plots lurking behind every tragedy, secret cabals pulling every string. To his loyal followers, Jones is a prophet. To everyone else, he is a dangerous carnival barker whose theatrics have left a trail of lawsuits, broken families, and shattered trust in democracy. He isn't just loud, he's reckless. From claiming that school shootings were staged to accusing grieving parents of being actors. His words have inflicted wounds that will never heal. Courts have ordered him to pay hundreds of millions in damages for the lies he spread, yet he refuses to stop. He leans into the chaos, daring truth itself to catch up to him. And in that studio, pounding the desk like a judge of his own court, he was doing what he's always done, weaponizing volume, rage, and fear. But this wasn't just another unchallenged broadcast. This time, Jones wasn't facing a caller or a sycophant or a fringe guest who nodded along. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a woman who represented not only her district, but also a generation of Americans tired of watching lies masquerade as facts. She didn't come armed with conspiracy theories. She came armed with truth, legal knowledge, and the patience of someone who had battled tougher opponents than a shouting radio host. And that's why this mattered. Because this wasn't just entertainment. This wasn't just political theater. This was a live collision between accountability and deception. A sitting lawmaker, sworn to uphold the Constitution, was locking eyes with a man who had spent his career tearing it apart for profit. The clash wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Every immigrant family scapegoated by wild conspiracies, every grieving parent mocked on national radio, every voter gaslit into believing democracy itself was a hoax. They all had a stake in this moment. The cameras captured Jones leaning in, voice shaking with rage. But it was clear the dynamic had shifted. Crockett wasn't giving him what he wanted. No fluster, no retreat, no shouting match. And that infuriated him even more. He threw out insults, accusations, and half-baked facts in rapid fire, hoping something would stick. Yet in her stillness, Crockett was building a tension more powerful than any outburst. Viewers sensed it. This wasn't going to be another clip lost in the endless churn of political drama. This was history in motion. People at home leaned closer to their screens. Comment threads exploded with anticipation. It was the feeling you get when you know the ground is about to shake, when you know the story you're watching will be told again and again. Because what was about to unfold wasn't just a battle of words. It was a test of who gets to define truth in America. And as Alex Jones pushed himself closer and closer to the edge, Jasmine Crockett was preparing to drop something no one could ignore. Viewers knew something historic was unfolding, but the most shocking moment hadn't even happened yet. To understand the eruption that was about to unfold, one must step back into the world Alex Jones built for himself, a world constructed from bluster, paranoia, and the endless roar of a microphone. In the 1990s, when mainstream radio played politics straight, Jones broke in like a battering ram. He was brash, he was loud, and he understood something few others did. Fear sells. It wasn't about reasoned debate or sober facts. It was about adrenaline, about whipping listeners into a frenzy and convincing them that only he saw the truth behind the curtain. From those early days, his brand of radio felt less like news and more like a wrestling promo. He'd pace the studio, voice thundering as he warned of shadow governments, alien plots, and martial law ready to descend on small-town America. For his followers, it was addictive. They weren't just listening to politics. They were being initiated into a secret world where they were the enlightened few and everyone else was asleep. Out of that energy came InfoWars, the media empire Jones molded into both a megaphone and a marketplace. With every broadcast came not just rants but pitches, survival food, water filters, dubious supplements. Truth was the bait, profit was the catch. And yet, for all his talk of uncovering hidden realities, Jones's empire was built on contradictions. He positioned himself as the voice of truth while courts and journalists dismantled his claims one after another. He thundered about defending families while cruelly tormenting the parents of Sandy Hook victims, branding them crisis actors as they mourned their children. He preached freedom while his rhetoric helped fuel harassment campaigns that left ordinary people living in fear. Again and again, the mask slipped, but Jones's arrogance kept him charging forward. The scandals piled high. Lawsuits stripped away millions, exposing InfoWars' finances and shattering any illusion of invulnerability. Clips circulated of Jones backpedaling under oath, admitting lies after years of insisting he was right. He would rail against the mainstream media, while secretly relying on their coverage to fuel his fire. He would decry government overreach while cashing in on the very panic he spread. Each contradiction chipped away at his credibility. Yet to his loyalists, the louder he shouted, the more they believed he must be telling the truth. This is where Jones's true power and fragility comes into view. His empire has always rested on a fragile balance, the performance of certainty masking a foundation of fear. He cannot afford to be wrong, because his persona is built on being the man who knows. That's why every challenge becomes a threat, every critic becomes an enemy, and every moment of silence feels like suffocation. For Jones, the only way to survive is to stay loud enough that no one notices the cracks in his armor. And that's what made this confrontation so dangerous for him. Facing Jasmine Crockett, he wasn't battling another conspiracy podcaster or a caller he could cut off mid-sentence. He was staring down a sitting member of Congress, someone with the credibility he lacked, someone who could calmly hold up receipts in the form of court rulings, sworn testimony, and documented lies. This wasn't a playground for theatrics anymore. It was a courtroom without walls, and millions were watching. The villain had walked into his own trap. His arrogance convinced him that his usual tactics, yelling, bulldozing, drowning the air in chaos, would overpower anyone who dared enter his studio. He didn't realize that the very bluster that built his empire now made him brittle. The louder he shouted, the more obvious his desperation became. The harder he pounded the desk, the clearer it was he was trying to drown out not Crockett's voice, but his own unraveling legacy. His story had been written in scandal after scandal, but now live on air, his contradictions were about to catch up with him. For the first time, The man who thrived on exposing supposed villains found himself cast as one, and the evidence against him was undeniable. But Crockett wasn't stepping onto his stage unprepared. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin in the spotlight of Congress, nor under the glare of studio cameras. It begins with grit, the kind forged in communities where opportunity is often scarce, but resilience runs deep. Born and raised with the lessons of hard work and justice instilled in her, Crockett carried with her an awareness of what it means to be underestimated. As a young black woman navigating spaces that too often sought to exclude her, she learned quickly that silence could be mistaken for weakness, and that dignity sometimes required speaking truth with fire. Her path into law was not carved out by privilege, but by determination. She chose to study law not for prestige, but for purpose, to fight for those whose voices were silenced by power and prejudice. As a public defender, she stood shoulder to shoulder with the marginalized, arguing for fairness in courtrooms where inequality was not an abstract idea, but a daily reality. Each case was a lesson, each battle a training ground. She learned to remain composed in the face of intimidation, to outmaneuver opponents not by volume, but by precision. It was there, in those high-pressure moments, that Crockett sharpened the calm composure that would one day leave men like Alex Jones flailing. Her rise into politics was born of the same fire. Tired of seeing laws written without regard for ordinary people, Crockett stepped into public service, determined to carry those courtroom lessons into the halls of government. But the political stage, much like the courtroom, was not kind. She faced scrutiny not just for her ideas, but for her identity, her skin color, her gender. Even the cadence of her voice became ammunition for opponents determined to dismiss her. Where male colleagues were described as passionate, she was painted as angry. Where others were seen as tough, she was framed as unruly. But Crockett never bent to those distortions. Instead, she leaned into her authenticity, mastering the balance between fiery delivery and factual grounding. She became known in Congress for moments that cut through noise with surgical clarity, her words precise, her evidence irrefutable. When critics tried to shout her down, she didn't shout back. She anchored herself in truth, letting their noise expose their own weakness. Slowly, she built a reputation. The congresswoman who came prepared, who fought with both passion and precision, who refused to be defined by the narratives others tried to impose. These battles were not easy. The toll of constant smear campaigns, the microaggressions, the relentless attempts to question her legitimacy, all of it could have worn her down. But Crockett carried herself with the weight of generations behind her, knowing that every victory was larger than herself. She wasn't just defending her own dignity. She was proving that women like her belonged in every room where power was exercised. Her calm dignity became her greatest weapon. While her opponents flailed with insults and stereotypes, she stood steady. This steadiness was not the absence of emotion, but the presence of control. It was the product of years in spaces where losing her temper would have been used against her. Years of learning that composure itself could be an act of defiance. And that's what made her such a striking contrast to Alex Jones. Where his empire thrived on chaos, she embodied order. Where he used volume to mask weakness, she used restraint to project strength. Where his arguments dissolved under scrutiny, hers solidified. Their clash was not just a battle of personalities. It was the collision of two worldviews, one built on deception and intimidation, the other on truth and resilience. For Crockett, this confrontation was never about matching Jones shout for shout. It was about holding the line, about proving that chaos cannot eclipse clarity, and that dignity is not a weakness, but a force. Every racist insult hurled at her in politics, every dismissive smirk from colleagues who underestimated her, every online smear designed to discredit her, all of it had prepared her for this moment. Because what Jones brought to the table was nothing new. He was simply another man convinced that volume could defeat truth, that chaos could bury dignity. But Crockett had seen that play before, and she had beaten it before. So when she walked into that studio, sitting across from Alex Jones, as his face turned crimson with rage, she carried more than her congressional title. She carried her legal battles, her personal scars, and her unshakable resolve. She carried the stories of the clients she defended, the voters who trusted her, the women and communities who saw themselves in her. She knew she wasn't just defending herself against Jones's lies. She was standing in for every person he had mocked, belittled, or targeted. Her life had been one long training ground for this confrontation. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need theatrics. She had something stronger: truth, composure, and the certainty that no lie, however loud, could outlast dignity. And in that studio, her life's battles prepared her for one unforgettable showdown. The confrontation began like a storm with no warning. Alex Jones leaned across the desk, his face crimson, his fist slamming against the wood with each syllable. "You're nothing but a puppet," he barked, veins bulging at his neck. "Bought and paid for by the same globalist cabal that's trying to destroy this country." His words spilled out in a torrent, each accusation louder and more frantic than the last. The microphone rattled as his voice cracked from sheer strain. Crockett did not move. Her hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced, posture unshaken. She let him unload his fury, every wild claim hanging in the air like smoke. Her eyes never left his, and in that gaze was something Jones was unaccustomed to, someone who saw through the performance. The first rebuttal came not in anger, but in calm precision. Crockett leaned slightly forward and spoke softly, her tone deliberate. "Mr. Jones, you've made these same claims in courtrooms where facts, not volume, decide outcomes. And in those courtrooms, you've admitted under oath that your words weren't true." The studio seemed to freeze. The contrast was stark. His chaos crashing against her calm, his bluster crumbling in the face of her composure. Jones erupted again, cutting her off before she could continue. "Lies. That's all propaganda. They twist my words. They twist everything." He gestured wildly, his voice pitching higher. "You're part of that machine. Don't think you can sit here and lecture me." But Crockett didn't raise her voice. She let his shouting echo into silence, then spoke with surgical clarity. "What I'm doing is holding you accountable for your own words. If you call that propaganda, then perhaps the problem isn't the truth. It's that you've run from it for too long." The tension grew heavier with each exchange. Jones interrupted again and again, throwing conspiracy after conspiracy into the air like confetti. Government plots, secret agendas, corrupt politicians. He hurled them all at once, hoping the sheer volume of claims would overwhelm her. Yet Crockett remained unfazed. She waited for the chaos to burn itself out before stepping in with facts, citing court rulings, testimonies, and public records. With each rebuttal, the imbalance became clearer. He was shouting to be heard. She was speaking to be understood. The audience at home could feel the shift. What began as another Alex Jones tirade was quickly becoming something else, a dismantling, a slow exposure of the man behind the mask. Social media threads lit up with play-by-play commentary. "She's not flinching. He's rattled. This is unbelievable." Jones's frustration grew with every moment she refused to be baited. His interruptions became more frantic, his insults sharper, his voice more ragged. "You're a fraud," he screamed. "A liar. You're destroying America." He jabbed a finger in her direction, as though accusation alone could carry weight. Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she delivered her responses like carefully placed stones in a wall, building a barrier against his chaos. "You've profited from lies that hurt families," she said. "You've admitted it yourself when it was time to face consequences. And today, on your own stage, you're proving once again that you fear the truth more than anything else." The studio was electric with tension. Even those behind the cameras could feel it, the sense that something extraordinary was happening, that this wasn't just another clash of personalities, but a turning point. The louder Jones grew, the more obvious it became that his rage was a shield against collapse. And the calmer Crockett remained, the more powerful she appeared. Viewers leaned forward in their seats. The chat feed scrolled endlessly, audiences waiting for the breaking point, waiting for the explosion they felt was inevitable. Jones's fury had reached a fever pitch, his words tripping over each other, his voice nearly breaking. Crockett's silence between his outbursts was deafening, a silence that demanded attention. And then, the moment that broke the internet. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Alex Jones had unleashed every ounce of fury he could muster, filling the studio with the sound of his own desperation. His face was flushed crimson, his fists marked the desk with dents, his voice cracking as it reached for volume over reason. The cameras caught it all, the sweat rolling down his temples, the quiver in his rage. And then silence. That silence belonged to Jasmine Crockett. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers still clasped together, her voice calm enough to force the audience to lean in. "Mr. Jones," she began, her tone precise and deliberate, "you've made a career out of calling yourself a truth-teller. But the truth has never been your ally. It has been your enemy." Jones tried to interject a guttural "that's a lie," bursting from his throat, but she didn't pause. She rolled forward like a prosecutor before a jury, stacking evidence brick by brick. "You told the world that Sandy Hook never happened," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "You called grieving parents actors. You profited from their pain, selling your supplements and survival kits, while mothers buried their children. And when the courts held you accountable, you admitted under oath that those claims were false." The studio fell still. Even the background hum of cameras seemed to fade. For the first time in the confrontation, Jones didn't have a ready retort. He sputtered, his lips trembling as he tried to summon another conspiracy. But Crockett pressed forward. "You told your followers that the government was controlling the weather, that chemicals in the water were altering people's very humanity. You frightened people into buying your products while laughing privately at their fear. And when asked for proof, you had nothing. Nothing but noise." Jones slammed his fist again, shouting, "They twist everything I say. They twist everything." But his voice sounded less like defiance and more like pleading. His volume grew, yet it carried no weight. Crockett paused. That pause was calculated. It wasn't hesitation, it was theater. She allowed his chaos to echo, to burn itself out, before she stepped back into the void with a single, devastating blow. "Mr. Jones, if your words have been twisted, it is only because they were lies to begin with." Gasps rippled through the studio. Even the crew, behind the cameras, couldn't hide their reactions. A stagehand covered his mouth. A producer leaned forward, eyes wide. The comment threads on the live stream exploded. "She's ending him. This is historic. He doesn't know what to do." Jones grew louder, almost incoherent. "You're just another puppet. Another fraud. I've told the truth for decades." His voice cracked under its own strain, his words spilling over themselves. His face glistened with sweat, his movements jerky, desperate. He pounded the desk again, as though physical force could somehow hold his unraveling empire together. And Crockett? She remained still. Stillness that commanded the room. Stillness that made his chaos look like desperation, his volume like weakness. "You say you've told the truth," she continued, her voice even. "But truth is not measured in decibels, Mr. Jones. It is measured in evidence. And every court that has examined your claims has found them to be false. You've admitted that yourself when the consequences came knocking. So I ask, were you lying then, or are you lying now?" The question landed like a thunderclap. Jones froze, his mouth opening and closing without words. For a brief moment, the man who made a career of never stopping, never conceding, never yielding, was speechless. And then he erupted. He threw back his chair, stood up, and shouted, so loudly his mic distorted. "This is a witch hunt. A smear campaign. You don't deserve that seat in Congress. You don't deserve anything." He paced the studio like a caged animal, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. He jabbed a finger toward her, his voice hoarse. "You think you can come here and take me down? You'll never silence me." But Crockett didn't need to silence him. He was doing that himself. Each frantic word, each incoherent accusation, made her composure glow brighter in contrast. She leaned back slightly, allowing his chaos to play itself out until his rant collapsed into ragged breathing. And then, softly but firmly, she delivered the line that would live forever in clips and headlines. "You're not being silenced, Mr. Jones. You're being exposed. The studio erupted, not in sound, but in energy. The audience online exploded with hashtags. Viewers clipped the moment instantly, replaying it in slow motion, captioning it, memeing it. The phrase ricocheted across timelines. You're not being silenced. You're being exposed. Jones tried to recover, sputtering denials, slamming his fist, even mocking her cadence. But the damage was done. Every rebuttal from Crockett landed like a hammer, every pause amplifying his panic. She called out the lawsuits. She cited the judgments. She reminded him and everyone watching of the billions of dollars owed to families he had defamed. She painted the picture of a man who shouted truth but cowered before facts. And with each revelation, Jones unraveled further. His face was crimson, his shirt damp, his voice cracking to the point of rasp. He shouted over her, but his interruptions sounded less like dominance and more like desperation. For once, Alex Jones wasn't the man who controlled the room with sheer volume. He was the man unraveling live before millions. Crockett leaned in for her closing strike. You've built a myth of yourself, the fearless truth-teller, the lone warrior against corruption. But myths only survive as long as no one pulls back the curtain. And today, Alex, that curtain is gone. You're not a warrior. You're a fraud who profited from pain. Jones screamed, his voice breaking into incoherence. He pounded the desk again, but the sound felt hollow. His empire was shaking, his persona stripped raw. Crockett sat there, calm as ever, her eyes locked on him, her voice steady as steel. She didn't just fact-check him. One commentator would later write. She undressed the myth of Alex Jones in front of millions. And in that moment, the myth did collapse. Live, raw, undeniable. But the shockwaves were only just beginning. The debate may have ended in the studio, but its true explosion happened online. Within minutes of the confrontation, clips of Jasmine Crockett calmly dismantling Alex Jones's empire of lies spread like wildfire across social media. The moment when she leaned in and declared, "You're not being silenced, Mr. Jones. You're being exposed," became the instant highlight, clipped, captioned, and remixed in real time. On Twitter/X, hashtag surged to the top of the trending list. Hashtag Crockett vs. Jones. Hashtag truth wins. Hashtag exposed live. Millions of users shared the footage, often set to dramatic music or slowed down for cinematic effect. One viral post paired Crockett's words with the sound of a mic dropping, garnering over 3 million views within hours. Another placed her calm stare side by side with Jones's frantic meltdown, the caption reading simply, "Grace versus chaos." TikTok took the showdown and turned it into a cultural moment. Teens and young adults lip-synced Crockett's lines, sipping from water bottles in perfect imitation of her composure. Meme creators flooded the platform with side-by-sides. Crockett calmly adjusting her blazer versus Jones, veins bulging, drenched in sweat. One meme went particularly viral. Jones screaming with the caption "Lies," while Crockett quietly sipped water with axe. It summed up the night in 2 still frames. On YouTube, commentary channels rushed to upload breakdowns. Titles range from Alex Jones destroyed Live by Representative Jasmine Crockett to the moment Alex Jones finally met his match. Political analysts dissected the debate like it was a heavyweight fight, round by round, pointing out where Jones spiraled and where Crockett delivered her precise counterattacks. Reaction videos flooded in, some with millions of views, as creators filmed themselves gasping, cheering, or laughing at Jones's outbursts. Celebrities, too, chimed in. Late-night hosts roasted Jones mercilessly, replaying his desk-slamming meltdown with exaggerated sound effects. Comedians joked that Jones had sweated out an entire InfoWars supplement catalog during the confrontation. Meanwhile, activists, journalists, and fellow lawmakers praised Crockett's poise. A well-known political commentator wrote, "In a single night, Jasmine Crockett became the face of fact over fiction. Alex Jones became the face of a meltdown." But the impact wasn't just about laughter and memes. The confrontation tapped into something deeper in the American psyche, a hunger for accountability. For years, Alex Jones had embodied a culture of unchecked conspiracy, a man who shouted lies until they sounded like truths, profiting from fear while dodging consequences. Seeing him cornered by calm, documented facts and unraveling in real time felt cathartic for millions who had watched his influence grow unchecked. Crockett, in turn, emerged as more than just a congresswoman. She became a symbol. A black woman, often underestimated and targeted by political smear campaigns, had stared down one of the loudest figures in American disinformation, and one not with rage, but with composure. Her image sipping water while Jones screamed became iconic, shorthand for the triumph of calm over chaos, fact over fiction. Even mainstream media, often hesitant to grant Jones airtime, couldn't resist covering the fallout. Headlines ran across outlets. Crockett exposes Jones live on air. The day Alex Jones lost his cool, when lies collapsed under the weight of truth. Panel discussions debated whether this was the moment Jones's influence finally cracked for good. Some argued it would galvanize his loyal followers further. But others noted that his unraveling live, with receipts stacked against him, marked a turning point. Behind the scenes, even advertisers and tech platforms reportedly took note. Jones's spiraling credibility reignited calls for stricter oversight of misinformation-driven media. Meanwhile, Crockett's team was flooded with messages of support, donations, and calls for her to take on a bigger national role. But perhaps the clearest measure of impact was cultural. The memes, the clips, the hashtags, they weren't just jokes. They were symbols of relief, moments of shared catharsis in a country exhausted by noise, lies, and spectacle. Crockett had given people something rare, the sight of a conspiracy king finally cornered by truth, with no escape. And yet, the confrontation's ripples stretched beyond one man, one studio, or one night. Viewers sensed it instinctively. This wasn't just about Alex Jones versus Jasmine Crockett. It was about something larger, something unfolding at the heart of America's struggle with truth, lies, and the power of narrative. Because, as one viral tweet asked, retweeted hundreds of thousands of times, if Alex Jones can be exposed live on air, what happens when the rest of America's liars are forced into the light? The memes kept flowing, the hashtags kept trending, and the laughter kept echoing. But beneath it all, a heavier question lingered. But what did this clash mean for America? The dust may have settled in the studio, but the meaning of that night still reverberated far beyond Alex Jones's desk. What Jasmine Crockett achieved wasn't simply a win in a heated exchange. It was a lesson, a reminder, and a symbol of what America still craves in an age of relentless noise. From the very first clash, the contrast had been unmistakable. Jones embodied chaos, pounding fists, raised voice, spiraling accusations. Crockett embodied calm, composed tone, measured words, and evidence stacked neatly like a lawyer presenting her case. It wasn't just a stylistic difference, it was an ideological one. The debate became a living metaphor for the times we live in. Truth versus chaos. Dignity versus deception. Jones thrives in environments where volume and spectacle drown out reason. For years, that formula worked. In the theater of outrage, he played the loudest part, and too often, others shrank back, unwilling to confront his noise. But Crockett refused to play by his rules. She didn't try to outshout him. She didn't descend into the swamp of insults or theatrics. Instead, she let his own bluster collapse under the weight of facts. The moral landed as clearly as her words that night. No matter how loud the lies become, calm truth can still cut through. For viewers across the country, that message resonated far beyond the spectacle. In an era defined by conspiracy theories, deepfakes, and viral misinformation, it can feel like reason has no place left. People grow numb to the shouting, skeptical that facts have any power at all. But Crockett's composure offered a reminder that truth is not powerless. It simply requires courage, patience, and the discipline to stand firm when the noise is deafening. Her approach carried another lesson too. Dignity is a weapon. Crockett's presence highlighted that strength doesn't always come from raising your voice or pounding the table. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be dragged down. She didn't just debate Jones. She reframed the very stage he had built for himself. By staying calm, she showed that dignity itself can disarm chaos. For America, that matters. Because the deeper fight isn't about Crockett versus Jones. It's about what kind of discourse we accept as normal. Do we continue to reward the loudest, most reckless voices? Or do we uplift those who stand firm in facts, who can weather the storm of outrage without losing their grounding? The confrontation became more than viral entertainment. It was a blueprint. It showed teachers, students, professionals, and ordinary people that shouting doesn't make lies true, and that anyone armed with patience and truth can stand their ground even against the loudest opposition. And so the cinematic closing image became symbolic in its simplicity. Jones fuming, sweating, shouting into a void of his own creation, while Crockett rose from her chair, gathered her papers, and walked calmly off set. No mic drop, no grand theatrics, just composure, dignity, and the quiet strength of someone who knows the truth is on her side. That is the lesson. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes, strength sits still, speaks calmly, and leaves chaos to burn itself out. In the end, Crockett's victory wasn't just over Alex Jones. It was a victory for every viewer who has ever wondered whether truth can still matter in a world addicted to lies. It was a reminder that chaos may be loud, but it is also fragile, and that dignity, when wielded with courage, has the power to outlast the storm. Because long after the hashtags fade and the memes are replaced by the next viral moment, one image will remain etched in memory. Jasmine Crockett walking off calmly, her silence louder than any of Jones's screams. And in that image lies the moral America needed. The truth doesn't have to shout to win. Alex Jones went nuts. Jasmine Crockett stayed calm. And truth won. That's the story America just witnessed. A clash not just between two people, but between two worlds. One built on bluster, rage, and reckless lies. The other grounded in facts, dignity, and the unshakable belief that truth still matters. For too long, voices like Jones's have dominated the conversation, not because they were right, but because they were loud. But Crockett proved that calm conviction can pierce through the noise. She reminded us all that integrity doesn't need theatrics to shine. It only needs courage. Moments like this don't just happen. They echo because people like you carry them forward. If you believe in voices like Jasmine Crockett's, voices that stand for reason, justice, and truth, then don't let this moment fade into the algorithm. Share this story. Talk about it. Subscribe, because together, we can make sure truth stays louder than lies. This isn't about one debate or one broadcast. It's about what kind of America we want to live in. Do we reward the screamers, or do we amplify the steady voices who hold the line against chaos? That choice belongs to us. And every share, every view, every voice added to this chorus pushes us closer to the world where dignity doesn't just survive, it leads. Because in the end, dignity will always outshine chaos.